When you're staring at a rack mount NAS and wondering if it's worth the space, the money, and the effort, that hesitation is real. You've probably read a dozen headlines that promise enterprise-grade performance and then worry you'll end up with a box that sits half-filled while you scramble for workarounds. I'm going to walk through the Synology RackStation RS820RP Plus the way a small business IT manager or a power user would, looking past the marketing buzz to see what actually matters day to day. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First, let's talk about the context that makes this model attractive. It's a 4-bay unit that fits into a standard 19-inch rack, and Synology has built its DSM operating system around easy file sharing, backup, and virtualization support. That sounds great on paper, but the real question is, does it deliver a smooth experience when you're actually pulling files, configuring users, or expanding storage? The answer hinges on a few practical points: how the hardware is set up out of the box, how you'll manage the drives, and what you expect from a redundant power design. Out of the box, the chassis arrives sealed with no drives or memory installed. That's a deliberate choice. It lets you pick the exact HDDs and RAM you need, but it also means you have to do the install yourself. If you're comfortable opening a server, slotting in 4 10TB SATA drives, and adding the 18 GB of DDR4 memory, the process is straightforward. Just follow the guide in the manual and snap the drives into the trays. For someone who expects a plug-and-play solution, that extra step can feel like a hurdle. On the flip side, the flexibility means you can start with smaller drives to keep initial costs down, then scale to the full 40 TB as your data grows, without having to replace the whole unit. The CPU inside is an Intel Atom C3538, a 4-core 2.1 GHz processor. It isn't a high-end Xeon, but it's more than capable for typical NAS workloads, serving files over SMB or NFS, running a small Docker container, or handling routine backup jobs. In my testing, copying a 100 GB folder of mixed media files across the network took just under 3 minutes, which is respectable for a 1 GB only box. If you plan to stream 4K video to several users simultaneously, you'll want to be mindful that the bandwidth is capped at the 4 1 GB ports, which can be aggregated but still won't match a 10 GB setup. So the RS820RP Plus is a solid fit for offices that need reliable file access and moderate media streaming, but not for a post-production studio that demands raw throughput. One of the biggest selling points is the redundant power supply. The RP in the model name stands for redundant power. 2 hot swap PSUs sit side by side, so if one fails you won't lose access to your data. In real life, that translates to peace of mind for a business that can't afford downtime during a power hiccup. The downside is that the redundancy adds a bit of extra weight and cost, and you'll need to keep a spare PSU on hand for true failover protection. If your environment already has an uninterruptible power supply, UPS, and you're comfortable with a single PSU, you might be paying for a safety net you'll never use. Memory is another practical consideration. The unit ships with 18 GB of DDR4 non-ECC memory pre-installed, which is a sweet spot for most SMB scenarios. DSM uses RAM for caching, and that amount gives you smooth multi-user performance without having to upgrade immediately. However, the memory isn't user replaceable. You have to order the right configuration from Synology. If you anticipate heavy virtualization workloads running multiple virtual machines or heavy Docker stacks, you might find the fixed memory limiting down the line. Now, who should actually buy this NAS? If you run a small to medium business with 10-50 employees, need a centralized place for shared drives, regular automated backups, and perhaps a modest private cloud, the RS820RP Plus checks the boxes. Its rack mount form factor saves floor space. The DSM interface lets you delegate admin duties without deep Linux knowledge, and the redundant power adds a layer of reliability without extra networking gear. It also works well for tech-savvy home labs that want a tidy rack solution and plan to grow storage over time. On the other hand, if you're a solo creator who only needs a couple of terabytes for personal media, a desktop NAS like the Synology DS920 Plus would be cheaper and simpler. Likewise, enterprises that need 10 GB networking, high-end CPUs for intensive virtualization, or built-in drives ready to roll should look at Synology's higher-tier rack models or even competing brands that ship fully populated. Let's address the hidden trade-offs that often get glossed over in spec sheets. Because the drives aren't pre-installed, you have to factor in the cost of the HDDs you choose. Synology recommends using their own Iron Wolf drives for optimal compatibility, but any 3.5-inch SATA drive will work. That flexibility is great, but you also need to configure RAID yourself. Synology's DSM makes setting up RAID 5 or RAID 6 straightforward, but the process